Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the player supplement Blackstaff's Tome of Wizardry, designed by Pyromaniac Press for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Huskar124, Wizard Princess, my favorite D&D player, and Christopher. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Nima, Marcos, Dad, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K. Cert, 2B, Adam, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Arash, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Sklenia, Nick. Thank you all very much for your support. Wizards are not one of my favorite classes of D&D, which is weird because it's such a staple of the fantasy RPG. The wizard with their staff, with their spell book, they're all about the spells. I think the problems for me started with I think it was 3rd edition that introduced the sorcerer, and then I want to say it was 3.5 that introduced the warlock. And for me, both of those classes were like wizards, but cooler. So the poor wizard was kind of left behind. And that kind of continues into 5th edition. In fact, I think it actually might even be a little bit, and this is just personal for me, even a little bit worse in 5th edition because they made the bard into a full-on arcane spellcaster at this point. And you get to be a bard. And I don't think the wizard spell schools, which is the wizard subclass, archetype, whatever word you want to use, I don't think they're particularly interesting to the point where everybody chooses divination because it is far and away the most useful and the most interesting. You get to roll those d20s and then use them at some cool point, almost like a point of inspiration or something. You can use it on yourself, you can use it on allies, you can use it for enemies. It's such a neat ability, and I don't think any of the Player's Handbook Wizard spell schools come even close to being that interesting. So, wizards, I'm not too up on in terms of them being interesting. I mean, the whole thing is you get to cast a lot of spells, you can scribe spells into your spell book. Sure, I guess that could be interesting. Blackstaff's Tome of Wizardry, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounced tome as tomb. I ran Tome of Annihilation for 2 years. It's probably going to happen at some point. I don't say tome often enough. But Blackstaff's Tome of Wizardry adds 31 new wizard archetypes. 31. It's a 90-page supplement. Also includes over 130 new spells, which is kind of assumed in any kind of wizard-related thing. You're going to add new spells. But in this case, it adds, from what I could tell, about 3 to 5 spells for each of those subclasses that are specifically thematically tied to that subclass, which is awesome because part of what I like to design a character is design them around a certain kind of theme. I think it'd be fun, especially if it's a spellcaster. I like to be an ice spellcaster or an earth spellcaster or a like a Jedi mind trick spell, psychic stuff. It's all of those themes are cool, and a lot of what this does is introduce a lot of those themes. It's a school of pheromancy for metal, and a school of arcane manipulation, and schools of literally all of the different elements and mentalism and all these things. And I think that's the right approach. I was not aware Blackstaff. I'm vaguely aware that Blackstaff is a character in D&D. I'm not up on my 5th edition lore, frankly. I didn't know it was a ghost, but apparently this book has both Blackstaff and his apprentice, or bequeathed apprentice, I guess. It looks like literally has the same titular Blackstaff named Varja. And they are both kind of in the text a little bit. They have the little sidebars where they'll make comments throughout, which is kind of nice. And I do like to see and that seems to be a popular way of doing these kind of supplements, is you inject personality via actual characters in the Forgotten Realms universe. And I think it does a pretty good job of that. I'm never a fan of when you use actual fancy script, especially if it's paragraphs and paragraphs. If you can get away with it if it's like a single sentence, written on a parchment or something as a fun little sidebar that looks neat. But for actual paragraphs of text, I don't think you should try and go with the fancy looking script. It just makes it kind of challenging to read, but that's a very nitpicky point. So with this mini Archetypes, I can't really do a deep dive into any one individual one because it would take absolutely forever. Instead, we can go over maybe some of my favorites and also kind of a reoccurring problem I have in a lot of these subclasses, which is that, and this is the same as the player's handbook, I suspect that the wizard archetypes seem weaker and not as interesting and kind of lame compared to other classes because it's their power level and their interest and variety is supposed to be made up in their spells. Wizards still have the largest variety of spells that they can cast and the potential to cast all of the spells with their spell scribing abilities. So it's more challenging to try and figure out the balance level of wizard spell schools and the power level and the interest because so much of all of that is derived from their spells. That being said, a lot of these just weren't super interesting, or I feel like their spells are actually more interesting than their abilities. So an example of this, we're going to have to go around because I did not write down what page some of these were on, but they are in alphabetical order, which I do love the look of this product. It's got a very nice look, artwork throughout. I really love how a lot of these pages use the artwork as a background, which is a tricky thing to do because you have to make sure it doesn't, the text doesn't bleed into the actual image on the page, and I think it looks really, really good here. And I also like the use of the characters and the sidebars. The actual product looks fantastic. So the Lunar Magi, which you can instantly think, okay, it's a night moon themed wizard that probably comes with some cool abilities. In this case, you are tied to the lunar cycle, which is literally a 30-day cycle between when you have a full moon and no moon. And you get a +1 to your spellcasting DC when there's a full moon out, and a -1 when there's no moon out. So that means the DM has to keep track of the freaking lunar moon cycle in the campaign. That's not going to happen. I don't know why this wasn't designed as a just day-night cycle. It's way easier to figure out, and I feel like other video games did that, where it's like as a trait, when you have the negative and positive thing, it's like, hey, during the day you're stronger and during the night you're weaker. In this case, it'd be the opposite. During the night you can be weaker, or maybe in darkness or whenever you can see the moon, and then during the day not so much. Or maybe do a thing where you have to be overhead because technically the moon's still there at night. You get Sacred Flame as a free cantrip. You can hide things in moonlight using a stealth check. You can hide objects or people up to a minute. It's just a lot of weird abilities that don't really... It seems like there's a lot you could do there, and none of those particularly excite me. But then the actual spells are pretty solid. Lunar Fire Fist, which is pretty self-explanatory. You can conjure a moon fist to punch people with. It does radiant damage. Moon Soul Revival uses moonlight to heal people. Twinned Lunar Fire Fist. What's better than one Fire Fist? 2 Fire Fists. And then Moonwalk, which is hilarious. You can use as a reaction to evade spells using illusion magic. And of course, I would absolutely require that person to literally be, moonwalking in order to escape. So in this case, I think all of these spells, some of them could have been just translated as abilities you can use a certain amount of days, and that would have been more interesting. So on the one hand, it's really cool that we got all these spells included, and I think the spells are a lot of fun. On the other hand, the spells actually are more interesting than the abilities in this particular case. Another example I had was the Green Star Adepts, which is this meteorite, the Green Star of Alhazred. And these wizards of this school infuse their bodies with this green crystal. And that amounts to, you get a natural AC bonus, you have unarmed attacks that deal monk scaling damage, which I guess a wizard might want that for some reason. You can add your intelligence modifier to ability checks involving the sky. Extremely limited. That's all 2nd level stuff. It's not terribly exciting. 6th level, you can add your intelligence modifier to strength and con saving throws. That's a little better, and you can make a con saving throw to avoid crits. Again, none of those are incredibly sexy, though. They're just kind of passive abilities that make you generically a little better defensively. But spell-wise, you can hurl a glowing green bands that can trap opponents. They have to make it grapples them. You can convert a gem into an explosive bomb, and the amount of damage it does scales depending on the value of the gem. That's really interesting. So you could turn somebody who gets, you get excited about loot, like, oh, is it a 5 GP gem or is it a 20 GP gem? And then suddenly your wizard's like, give that to me, that's a bomb I'm going to use. And then you can create a clone of yourself made out of green crystal. All of those abilities seem like they would just be, or all of those spells would be cool abilities, but instead they're just spells that are just thematically tied to that particular class, and I think in that case the spells are more interesting than the abilities themselves. And is that just me as somebody who poo-poos on wizards and just feels like spells are better than abilities, or is there a way to make the wizard schools interesting while also still having those cool spells? Now, there are some legitimately interesting spell schools in here, obviously. I think with 30, first of all, you're getting quantity over quality, which is never great. I would always much rather have a supplement that added 4 or 5 really excellent, well thought out, well designed original character classes than one that had 10 times as many. Because when you have that many, you're going to end up with overlaps, you're going to end up borrowing from other classes and other abilities, you're going to end up just kind of swapping features in and out. It's going to happen. Like, there's just not that many things you can do. Even in this case where it's a collaboration from many different creators, which I do like that they are individually attributed in all of these after every single one, which is something I've complained about in the past, so it's awesome to see that here is that they're actually individual ones. So if I like particular ones and I notice they're all by, or most of them are by a certain creator, I can be like, okay, this person gets me. I can look up more of their work. So I do, that is a thumbs up. But the cool abilities, I think Guild Wizardry has an interesting idea where you're actually part of a guild and allows you to swap spells with other guildmates. It kind of puts a lot of onus on the DM. It allows you to just kind of swap spells around with other wizards, and you actually have to pay dues in order to gain a lot of these extra abilities, so that's kind of an interesting thing on top of it. I did like the School of Phyromancy. Let's see if we can find the Fs. There we go. Actually, Phyromancy and Fluoromancy are both cool. Phyromancy, you are Magneto. You have magnet abilities, which translate to getting a kind of a shield type ability, although this one scales with your intelligence modifier. I love that you can cause static electricity on opponents when they fail saving throws, and any creature that has the static charge, like status effect, deals damage, deals 1d6 lightning damage to those around them that also have that charge. So if you picture something like doing Burning Hands, that can hit multiple creatures, and they can all become static, and they all take extra damage. That's kind of it's a little bit extra to keep up with, but I think it's a neat extra thing that I haven't seen before, which is like bestowing this one ability that doesn't have anything to do on its own, but when chained to multiple creatures, it does cause extra effects, which is kind of cool. And of course, you gain like metallic armor, you can a magnetic field, you can pull creatures in, all of that stuff's cool. And the ability-wise, you gain the Magneto shit, where you can just make a bunch of like metal strips like fly out at enemies and all that. So I think that's a cool combination of having interesting spells which are metal themed and interesting abilities that are metal and magnet themed, and that's something that is not already covered in other spell schools that I've seen. Fluoromancy is light. I guess that's a way of talking about light. This one, you can add blinding effects to any spell with visual effects, not just ones that actually blind, so you're good at blinding people. You can displace yourself, I think as a reaction, made with disadvantage, lasts till the end of your next turn. Yeah, as a reaction to being attacked. You can bend light, which is really cool. And then the spells, you can create like this, essentially a lightning bolt that does, light damage, or surround yourself with the healing power of light and all these. So it's a good combination. I think it does a good job of there we go, I missed it. Prismatic Ray, Radiant Burst, Radiant Shield is the defensive maneuver. It's got good abilities, and it's got good spells. And there are, off the top of my head, probably a dozen in here that I think are really solid ideas, which is a third. And it's a tricky thing to complain about, is like the whole product, I'm not super into a lot of these subclasses, but there's enough in here that I think the overall product is good, because I like the ones that I like. So it's a weird complaint that's like, there's a lot here and not a lot is that interesting, but the ones that I do find interesting I think are really good. There's a couple of pet classes like Golemancy, in which case I like that you get the ability at second level. So many of these subclasses, you don't even get an interesting ability until later on. And one thing I always look at for like my at a glance in terms of player classes and build, because obviously I'm not playing any of these, I just have to kind of look at it and see how I think. And I'm always looking at what do you get in those first 10 levels, because if you have to wait too long before your cool abilities turn on, no thanks. Like we all know the majority of D&D is spent in that tier 1 and tier 2, so I'm always looking to see some of the best well-designed subclasses, in my opinion, front load an interesting ability at the beginning, whether it's 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, whatever you're going to get a 6th level, even as late as the second time you get an ability for wizards. And then, if possible, you can make that ability better. You can add to it. You can expand it as you level up, which is something that Golomancy does. And there's another pet class called it's a marionette. I forget what it's actually called, like School of Ventriloquism or something. But you get like a magical marionette that you can cast spells from and move around. And that's a similar concept where you get it pretty early on, because that's the whole point of the class. And then you can build on top of that as you go. So I do like to see that. Let's see, other ones that I enjoyed. Oh, we can go over the elemental ones, and I was actually pretty down on these for the most part, which it seems like that'd be an easy thing to do, like School of Plants, of Earth, of Water, and all that. On the one hand, I'm impressed that they're all different, because I think the easy thing to do would be to make one elemental school and then just be able to swap out. If it's like, hey, you do more damage using this element, and you're resistant to this element, and just, you can literally say whichever school you go onto. But the result, I don't think, makes any of these necessarily exciting. Geomancy, interesting, is all about transforming yourself into that element, and at 14th level, you can straight up turn into an earth elemental. Whereas others, like Aeromancy, you can cast Levitate, but it's only whenever you cast Levitate, you can levitate somebody else with you. It's not until 14th level that you actually gain the ability to fly around, which again is something I'm looking at, like, well, how soon do you get like the cool stuff here? Hydromancy, you can breathe water, you can make a geyser. At 6th, okay, this is an example of one that is not exciting in the beginning. You can breathe water and have a swim speed. Okay, that's cool, but you can also just pick a race that does that. At 6th level, you can turn an object into water once per short rest. And then that's it. Until 10th level, you can summon a big geyser, which is okay, fine. I mean, a lot of these just seem like a Triton could do a lot of this stuff. So it doesn't, none of that is particularly interesting. And obviously, all the spells are less useful here, because one thing that, if we're including all the spells added in the Elemental Companion, whichever player's handbook version of the Elemental Apocalypse one they added a bunch of those elemental related spells, so we don't really need spells for that, and I don't think any of these classes are particularly interesting. But like Pyromancy, for example, at 10th level, you can siphon fire and heat to add to your damage, which is a neat concept. You're draining the fire around you to power up your own abilities, and that requires fire in the area, and it even says you can only use it once per short rest, but you don't get it until 10th level. Why 10th level? Like, that's not that powerful. You can have it scale to your level. It's already per, a rest feature, and you have to have fire there. Just make that an earlier ability. Like, there's no reason to wait till a friggin' 10th level to do that. So it's a lot of what I'm looking at is how soon do you get the more interesting abilities, and that one I think fails the test there. Let's see, other ones that I enjoyed. Do I have another one? Runecraft and Soul Binding and Nethermancy. So we need to go to the back half. Puppetry. That was the marionette one. So Nethermancy is shadow magic, which is another good one that hasn't really been covered before, at least in the player's handbook. You gain, it's kind of similar to the Shadow Monk. You can teleport in shadows. Eventually, you are better at dealing necrotic and psychic damage. You can manipulate your conjured animals to make them more shadowy creatures, and put like a darkness spell on top of it when you summon them. It's got a spell that seems like this should have been an ability. The spell is called Blade of Flickering Shadows, and it transforms you into there's a creature of shadow, but you kind of drift in and out between the material plane and the Shadowfell plane, and you literally have to roll a d20, I believe, at the start of each turn. You have an 11 or higher, you disappear from your current plane of existence and reappear, so you don't have a control over it. It's a 4th level spell, you have to cast, you have resistance to necrotic damage, you deal extra damage, and you can only affect things with necrotic if you're in that weird, like, halfway point realm. That seems like something that should have just been an ability to use, like, right? You can turn on the ability to just go shadow mode, but it's got all these crazy restrictions and rules involved. That shouldn't be a spell. Like, just make that an ability that you can do at, maybe a 6th level or something. I like Nethermancy, but that was a good example of one that I think the spell should have just been an ability that they can do instead of just being a thematic spell. Let's see, what was the Runecraft? This is one I think I've seen a couple times, this concept of using giant runes from Storm King's Thunder. I don't know if they're literally from Storm King's, but that's what I'm remembering them from. You actually tattoo them on your body, and then you gain the permanent passive bonus, which is usually okay, but then you can activate a more active bonus a certain amount of times for your intelligence modifier, and you can scribe more runes as you level up. And this is a good example of one that you get the whole point of the class early on at 2nd level. You can choose 3 of these tattoos, and then as you level up, you gain more understanding of the runes. You can trace them on a physical object or an area, and then your whole party gets that effect as long as you're in that area, and you can gain more tattoos and all that. And anything that gives me the ability to pick and choose things to further customize my class, I'm always excited about. So I do like the School of Runecraft quite a bit. And then Soulbinding, you are a Lich Light. You create an object that has armor class, damage threshold, and hit points, equal to, I believe, half of your max hit points. And you got like a Horcrux, like you can transfer some of the damage that's done to you to the object, and there's all these different kind of abilities that have to do with it. Again, something you get right at 2nd level, and then as you level up, it kind of expands and does other things. Not all the classes have to do that, but I think a lot of the fun classes come up with a single concept, and then just expand on that concept as you level up and make it more interesting and cool. And I think that's a lot of these do that. So, I mean, right there was half a dozen schools that I really like. I think there's about a dozen here that I, in general, really enjoy. I think the strength of this entire product is it's very professionally designed. It's got awesome artwork. It's well organized, well edited. I had no issue with any of that. And the new spells really help sell a lot of these classes, because even classes that I wasn't fully on board with in terms of their abilities, I thought they had cool spells. And so maybe you can kind of work with that or work around that and say, well, even if I'm not going to use my abilities much, I've got this cool spell that I can use, and wizards, as they level up, will have plenty of spell slots. So I feel like I can still do my thing and have my character concept that I really liked and enjoyed and bring that to life. So I think overall it does a good job, even if I think most of the classes I didn't actually end up being a big fan of. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Blackstaff's Tome of Wizardry. Pros: 31 new wizard schools, from metals and magnets to shadow, lunar, golems, and mentalism. The sheer number of them is technically a positive, even if I didn't quite enjoy all of them. Pros: every new wizard school has 3 to 5 new spells tied to that school. That is a huge strength of this product, that we get over 100, and I believe the DM's Guild page says 139 spells, which is astonishing. And a lot of them are literally just taking a spell and retheming it, but that's fine, because that takes the work that I would have to do if I was playing that. If I wanted to play a mentalist themed wizard, it does the work of retheming a lot of those spells into exactly what I want. So that's perfectly fine. I mean, there's tons of spells. It's really hard to come up with a completely original spell idea, but I think they're really good in general. Pros, which I'm looking at right now: indexes of all the spells, given this product is 90 pages long, and that each of the spells is embedded in each of those classes, which I think is the right way to organize it. But also the right thing to do is to provide this, which is several pages of indexes that divide them by spell school, by level, and by, I think it's just alphabetical order. By name. So you can find your spells pretty easily, but I think the way it's organized originally in the text is the right way to do it, which is to put them with all their individual schools. And it's just a professionally designed product with really great art. I like the theme with the sidebars of all the Blackstaff and the new apprentice. I think that works really, really well. The con is that I think too often in a lot of these wizard schools that the spells are actually more interesting than the abilities themselves, which is my constructive way of saying that a lot of these wizard schools didn't particularly work for me, because I just thought their abilities just frankly weren't that interesting compared to a lot of the spells, which were pretty interesting. Final verdict, Blackstaff's Tome of Wizardry offers a large variety of wizard subclasses and themed spells, but the high volume approach favors quantity over quality. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.